Welcome to this new video in the classroom about philosophy and metaphysics of divination. Last time I talked about more philosophical aspects. Today I'll be focusing a little bit more on psychological aspects. And I'll start with the philosophical aspect that I talked less about last time, free will. Free will is much better looked at under psychology than it is under philosophy. So in any case, before I get into it, there's a little story I'd like to tell about my about when I was studying psychology in university. My neuroscience professor told us this little story when he began his class. He said that he didn't want anybody arguing about free will in his class, that it did not have any room in his class. I'll remember that. He said, are we happy because we have neurotransmitters that are going through our brain circuitry, or do we have serotonin going through our brain circuitry because we are happy? He said it was the chicken or the egg, that it didn't really matter. It's not something that you can answer. Science can only explain things in terms of causality. Now, today, when I think about that story, I see that when it comes to things such as, well, happiness, in the case of the example, or free will, and many of the psychological aspects, epistemologically speaking, it is, I find, better explained with, much better explained with synchronicity than some things would be with causality. I'll probably be coming back to this example a little further down. So, just to make sure I didn't forget anything. Yes, okay. So the psychological aspect of free will. Well, the first thing, free will described as an ability to choose. It's important to notice that not everyone are as free as anyone else. So one example that I like to give is that you take a continuum. So on negative infinity on one side, positive infinity on the other side. Now, if you have that continuum, so it's a line, and you put a dot on that line, no matter where that dot is, it will always be in the center of the line. So there will always be negative infinity on one side and positive infinity on the other side. And then you can move as many units as you want to one side or to the other side. The movement will always be relative to where you were before, because in the absolute, you will always be right smack in the center of infinity, so to speak, because there will always be the same quantity, positive infinity on one side, and the other quantity, negative infinity on the other side, when you start calculating it. So now let's bring that to free will, or freedom, or psychological freedom, so to speak. So you have, on the one side, absolute determinism, which means that all of your decisions are nothing but a causal, related, predictable, robotic machine thing. It's as mathematical as as calculating the angle that a billiard ball hits another billiard ball and which one it will go, at least in theory, if they were perfect spheres and if there was no heat loss due to friction and so on and so forth. So you have 0, 0, 0 free will on one side, absolute positive determinism on one side. The other side, it is perfect free will. Now, perfect free will, there is absolutely zero determinisms. There are no chains attached at all. Now, the only way something can have zero chains attached in the universe, of course, is its perfect and total isolation. It's a closed system. It's a total independence or non-dependence or non-relationship to the external. Because if there is relationship from a closed system to the external, then it's possible to have some influence and at least some sort of causal deterministic relationship at some point. So you have this absolute free will that nothing can touch you, because you are totally and completely free, you are totally and completely spontaneous on the one side, and the other hand, that there is absolutely no freedom at all. You don't even know that you're not free, nor even think that you're free. You're basically just a machine, so to speak. So each and every one of us are somewhere on that line between those two impossible to reach poles. There's we're more free than some people and less free than others, psychologically speaking. And the whole idea, when it comes to divination, magic, etc., it's that you're more on the deterministic side, and you're supposed to go more towards the free side. Now, freedom, psychological freedom, might need a definition here. There's a lot of misconceptions on freedom. I simply like to say that freedom is the ability to choose. Now, if I'm going to use a real world example, let's talk about homelessness. I've spoken to homeless people that have said that being homeless is the greatest freedom they've ever had. It's absolutely. It's a feeling of freedom that they'll never want to go back to living in society and having the job and having this, having that. But if they needed to, they're in a situation where they can't necessarily choose to just get back in a house and start producing into the system. They can't choose that readily. Whereas somebody who owns a house, they can say, well, I'm just going to go and have that feeling of, I'm just going to throw everything out the window and have that feeling of freedom tomorrow morning. And they just throw their house away and so on and so forth, abandon everything and become homeless. A person can choose that when they have a house, when they have everything, but they can't choose that when they are effectively homeless. So this whole idea that if you can't choose, well, you're not necessarily free. Perhaps another example that we see a lot in the news is the whole idea of the American healthcare system. For us Canadians who are living in a beautiful country with free healthcare, well, healthcare paid for by our taxes, and we see Americans, no, all of this healthcare, it takes away your freedom, it's socialism and whatever, you're going to live under a tyrannic government just because you have socialized healthcare. Well, I don't know. I can choose to go to the hospital whenever I like, whereas I remember the first time I was traveling to the United States, they would say, if ever you see someone get hurt, don't call an ambulance. Here in Canada, or first, when someone is an accident or something, you call an ambulance. You call the emergency services. They're like, don't do that in the United States. You can get sued for it, because if that person is uninsured, they're going to look at you. They say, you call the ambulance. You owe us thousands and thousands of dollars. Doesn't sound like freedom to me. So the idea that we have the freedom to choose to have healthcare or not on a whim would be interpreted as more freedom, because it can be chosen rather than less. Anyways, that might not be the best example because it's political, and the United States are going through an election. Anyways, so just to make sure I'm not losing my thought. Yes, I was going to make another comparison, another real-world comparison, the human being versus a protozoa. Now, here's the thing: a protozoa is going through the water, searching for food, and at some point, there's exactly as much food on the left side and exactly as much food on the right side. And why does it choose to go left rather than right to get its food? Who knows? It made a choice, right? Of course, hard determinists will say, well, no, that's a spontaneous thing. There's no, it doesn't have free will. Free will is an illusion. It just happened because the chemicals went right instead of going left, and it was a purely causal relation. Well, once again, do the chemicals go right or left because it has free will, or does it have free will because the chemicals can go left or right as a free choice? Once again, it's not something that causality can explain, but it's better explained by synchronicity in this case. Or even by what I called last time telosity or finality. So it's better explained by the fact that it wants food, and it doesn't really matter whether it chooses to go left or right. The end result, the reason why it's happening is for it to get food. So an apologist of telosity will say, no, there is no free will. The idea was getting food, and he went to get food either way. Whether it was left or right is just different possibilities to get to the end, which was predetermined. And by the way, for those of you who read the translation of Stanislav de Gaeta that I have posted, Stanislav de Gaeta calls that providence instead of telosity or a finality. And he basically attributes it to the will of the gods, which is indeed the traditional way that it was used. Traditional way that it was explained, kind of like God has a plan for you and this and that, and he's always going to give you the life lessons that you need in order for you to get your soul to where it's supposed to be in its level of development, and so on and so forth. So that I don't lose my place here. Okay. So I've spoken about how the level of freedom is something that is it's something that is on a continuum. Some people are more free, some people are less free. I gave the example of the protozoa. It has its own little not too complex chemical reaction, which is closer to a machine than to this really huge complex brain that humans have, which is closer to the free will pole of our continuum. And now imagine that continuum of free will, but you also have the factor of causality, of course, that is affecting our choices, and telosity that is also affecting our choices. So you have that in the mix, and that kind of all influence on each other, that have influence on free will, and out of that mixture, the mixture of free will, of telosity, and of causality, there kind of emerges this free will. And I think I mentioned last time, it was mostly, it's understood as enabled by consciousness, which has this feedback loop of all of this telosity, the reasons why things are going on, and causality, the reasons why, the reason before things are going on, the events leading up to, and where the events are going to lend towards. And so free will kind of comes out of that situation. Well, comes out, interacts with that situation, depending on how we are. And this whole idea of free will, the reason I had put it on this continuum, and it's because it's developmental. We as adults are much more free than we were as kids, and some people, they basically, I think we can all think of some people that never really choose. They have their emotions choose for them, or they never really choose anything. They have the contingencies of life kind of force them into situations, or they always feel forced, and they never really take a step back, on anything else. And the whole idea that we can get better choosers or more conscious choosers, making us free, is intrinsically aligned with divination. That's the whole point of divination, actually. It's to give us, it's to give us more freedom. It's to give us a greater range of consciousness, a greater perspective on everything, so that we can think outside the box in order to make more complete, more complete. I only have the French words in my head right now. More complete and broader choices. So I'll give an example when it comes to tarot. People will say, well, tarot, it's the spirit guides that are talking to you, and they're sending messages, and it's your job to figure out these messages, and so on and so forth. That's finality, and that's a little bit removed from removed from the psychology of it all, let's just say for a second that the tarot cards, or well, the swinging of the pendulum, or the images that you see in the crystal ball, or the dreams that you've had last night after you have made your prayers or your invocations, or so on and so forth. All of these ideas are meant to, well, what they do is that they stimulate your mind, they stimulate your imagination. It was Oswald Wirth that said the true faculty of divination is necessarily the imagination, because it's the part of our brains that can see things that are outside of this, of all of this that comes into through our senses, through our memories, through everything that's happened. The imagination is the creative aspect of the human being that can think outside the box, that can come out with something new. Divination's purpose in this sense is to stimulate the imagination, to expand consciousness, to let us see things that we had never seen before. And because of that possibility, it expands our free will, it expands our sight, our foresight into what is actually becoming, what is actually happening, both in the present and towards the future. So related to this story, I'm reminded of someone who was very, very strongly into the LGBT community, and they asked me, hey, which one is the gay major arcana of the tarot? Which one is the LGBT card that will tell you this and that? And I answered this. I said they all are. What do you mean they all are? You mean the cards are all gay? Well, yes, all of the cards, all of the 78 cards of the major arcana, they can express the LGBTQ reality, just as they can also express its opposite. You know, psychologically, we are in a society where everything has definite, precise meaning. If you go driving, the street signs, they're pictograms. They have one meaning, and you better know what it means, because it can have dire consequences. You know, writing, it's really, really precise, especially with computers. Poetry is frowned upon. You can't have poetry when it comes to computers. When you have to give the exact commands to get the exact result. You have to be very precise at work. You have to be very procedural, etc., etc. Our society is really based on having exact meanings of things and not anything else. The tarot, or the symbols that you will see, divination in your dreams, they are not meant to have a precise, clothed meaning. They are open-ended. The tarot card is, each and every tarot card, the major arcana, represents the entire universe. The signs are horizons. They're horizons. They are not closed systems. So when you are into the tarot and you are doing your reading, necessarily your imagination is meant to be stimulated, to see things that you didn't see, to have a perspective that you didn't see before, and to actually go wider and broader than, of course, the causal situation that you have had presented to you, or even the free situation that you have had, you know, with your limited freedom, to expand that a little bit and to see something a little bit beyond at that point. So when you are looking beyond, the whole question comes from the situation of the altered states of consciousness. Some people will say, well, when I do divination, I go into a trance. I go and I have to be in an altered state of consciousness to see things. And you'll have people that say, well, when I divine, I just put myself into a trance and I start talking, and the images, they kind of come to me and they go themselves. Psychologically, of course, that is the whole idea, that you put your brain in a receptive state, and there's a part of the mind that the person is able to access directly, and to simply go ahead and do it, to go into that part of the mind, the imagination or whatnot, whatever you want to call it, that actually has access to this thinking outside of the box, to this bringing out different perspectives. Another person told me, what are the tricks to being a perfect diviner? Well, I told them, at the end of the day, divination is not necessarily about the method. It's really, really about the result. You can have the most awkward person versus the most charismatic, interesting, talkative person during a divination session. Pardon me. Uh, the better diviner is the one who gets it right. the one who's the one whose the one whose divination is synchronous with what is actually going to happen, whether that be from a teleological perspective, causal perspective, or even something that that increases the free will of the person. So once you have that, you have the one who's the quote unquote the better diviner, and they are able to access that. We can say that divination is essentially 100% a human perspective. Some people, they take up the guitar and they are awesome as soon as they try it and they become great guitarists. Some people need to practice a lot in order to access that part of the brain that processes music so that they can actually play their instrument in an expert fashion. Well, same thing with divination. When you are, like me, a human being, you have to practice. To be honest, when I first started, I wasn't really good, to be truthful. So I had to practice a lot. I had to do a lot of these things. I remember I used to bring runes, and I used to bring my tarot cards to bars, and just do random divinations for people and try to get it right. I've been called fraud by a lot of people at first, and to be honest, it was kind of fun because I did say, well, you know what? You're absolutely right. I was doing guesswork, trying to figure this thing out, and apparently it had not worked. And that was quite true. But with time, you see that statistically you're getting better and better. And as you get better and better, you are able to introspect a little bit and understand how that skill is actually gaining and growing. And you know how to reach or access that part of the mind that that accesses the divination skill or the divination capacity that you have. So this whole developmental aspect is interesting in two ways, and I'm going to compare this to what people call high magic and low magic. I prefer calling it initiatic magic versus operational magic. So, and then there's a tie-in with the altered states of consciousness too. The idea, of course, is that you can practice a skill and be good at that skill only while doing that skill. So if you do divination just for the moment, I'm just going to do tarot and just tarot, and I'm just doing basic, ordinary, in French we say la bonne aventure, not really divination, but just a basic, ordinary fortune telling. And so the idea is that you're doing basic fortune telling and you're just doing that. You're not concerned with how is this going to make me a better person and how is this going to make me evolve spiritually in the grand scheme of things. And it doesn't really matter, because the more that you do it, then you'll learn that, okay, I'm an expert with tarot, and then I'm just going to transpose this skill that I learned with tarot, and I'm like, hey, I'm a little bit better at interpreting dreams. And hey, somebody talked to me about the runes, and while I don't quite get the exact symbols, I get how it's done, and I think I can get into it. And oh yeah, when I try a pendulum after I've been becoming very good with the tarot, I can actually understand how you need to relax your hand the same way that you relax a part of your mind when you're trying to figure out what the cards mean. So doing just the skill, the basic operational skill, is actually something that becomes generalized, and whether you like it or not, it transforms you as a person and helps you evolve. On the other hand, there are people who will go the initiatic path or the developmental path or the high magic path, and they will work specially on their spiritual intelligence, try to have a greater and deeper relationship with nature, with the gods, or God, or both, which are the same, perhaps, and will be concentrated or or basically, in a very atheistic, humanistic sense, be concerned with their compassion, with their ability to feel the others, with their ability to understand what's what is actually going on deeper than just the mere senses and the mere cultural signs and signals that we get. And so this whole, and then when they do that, when they're actually, much more attuned with others, attuned with their surroundings, and they're much more present and here and now, and they gain this this depth of perception. Of course, when they come to divination, they're going to be a lot more predisposed to have this quality divination than if they have none of that personal development, if they have none of that understanding. So the altered state of consciousness part, there is the in the moment, which I like to put that on a horizontal. You're kind of you're more towards that mystical divination feeling, and then you're more towards that ordinary, bored, automatic feeling of the day. Kind of like when you're at work and you're bored and you're just repeating your task. There's no divination there at all. Or maybe there is for some, but that's up for discussion. And then you're into this really, really here and now meditative state, and I can see a whole bunch of things with a whole bunch of depth. So there is this continuum that you have, for the moment, from bored to mystically awesome. And as a parenthesis, those are things that are impermanent. Like, how long can you stay angry? How long can you stay joyful? How long can you cry without your body being like, well, I'm tired of being in this one altered state of consciousness. I have to change before I have neurological fatigue. Now that's the horizontal level, which we could talk about operational magic or fortune-telling divination or on-the-moment divination. And then there's the horizontal. Jacob's ladder is used in Kabbalah a lot. Jacob's ladder, which represent the stages onto which someone becomes, higher, more attuned. I don't like hierarchy to use it in that way, to say one is better than the other, but I do like to say that it's a form of cognitive complexity that is developed, kind of like math, kind of like music. Someone who's really good at guitar and who's really developed their musical intelligence, they're not better than me as I am, as a human being. They just have that part that's really good. Well, the same thing when it comes to spiritual intelligence, to spiritual understanding of reality and such, being in tune with nature. When you have that personal development on the horizontal level, the vertical level, of course you'll find snobs, just like you find music snobs who are better than me because they play great guitar. Well, good for them. So I would like to say that yes, it's important to stay humble and so on and so forth. But if that's not your thing, well, good for you. So next thing, if I may. Yes. Okay. Just make sure I'm staying organized. I apologize for this. So the initiatic path, Jacob's ladder, psychological development, or in this case, psycho-spiritual development. That is something that is quite important. And how do you do that? Well, of course, there's a lot of ideas. If you're into the magical path, the initiatic path, there's lots of books. There's lots of things. Alchemy. If you're into psychology, you can look into. Well, you know what? Actually, I was going to do a different video on that. I won't touch that too much. I'll get more into detail later. When it comes to in the moment, well, that of course is something that, like I said, needs to be practiced. It's something that needs to be done because it's really an operation-based learning versus a self-psychological development. And so, just to make sure, Okay. So the psychological aspects of divination, if I am to summarize a little bit, there is, we are as good as our sight goes. So divination uh, doesn't give you like impossible eyesight, but it does expand consciousness in order to let us see a little broader, a little deeper. Um, Divination is related, of course, to our personal development on the one hand and our skill development on the other. It's essentially something that's very human. It's something that we get better into. And there was the whole idea of mental health that I did want to touch upon. I'm seeing that I'm at 31 minutes so far, so I'm going to stop it here. The whole mental health aspect and helping relationship intervention aspect, the whole aspect of doing divination as a healer. I'll talk about that a lot later. So for today, I think I'll leave it at that. I'm going to wish you an excellent day. If there are any comments, suggestions, complaints, questions, please feel free. You can write them either in our personal message or you can write them at the bottom of the video. I'll be very happy to answer. And I will be putting a little bit more information soon, not by video. So stay tuned and until next time, goodbye.